Yo, what's good? Amateur Lore here, and we're back with another video. Today we're looking at some of the weirdest college football conference titles maybe in college football history, part 2. Let me know down below any topics, teams, or ideas you might have. Part of this video entry came from a comment by Cody. I can't pronounce your name, but thanks bro for putting me on beat. Anyway, these videos take a while to make, so a like and a sub goes a long way. But that's enough of the e-begging, let's get to the college football. This first team that we're covering today has to have one of the most unusual college football seasons I've ever seen. If this team we're looking at today didn't have some crazy factors outside of their control playing out in the background, and a couple of good old sanctions handed down to some of their fellow conference mates, then this entry for this video wouldn't have even been possible. But at last, here we are today taking a look at the 2012 Wisconsin Badgers, who has to be one of the weirdest teams ever to win a conference title. And I'm sure after we get done with this team's entry, most of you will feel the same way too. Alright, so coming into the 2012 college football season, the Badgers were coming off 3 straight banger seasons, going 10-4 in 2009, winning the Champs Sports Bowl, 11-2 in 2010 with the Big Ten shared title and a loss in the Rose Bowl, and finally in 2011 going 11-3, winning the Big Ten title outright as well as losing in the Rose Bowl again. So I think it's safe to assume that the loyal fans in Madison were expecting at the very least a Big Ten title with the Rose Bowl appearance this year. And when going back in time to 2012 and looking through some of the Big Ten preseason predictions, it seems like some of the media over at ESPN were feeling the exact same way, as they had the Badgers finishing first in the Big Ten Leaders Division. But, and there's a big but, I do have to mention that Ohio State and Penn State were ineligible this year due to NCAA sanctions. So if you're wondering why the preseason predictions had Ohio State finishing with a 10-2 record and falling behind Wisconsin, that's why. That was a really short intro. Now let's take a look at some of the dudes making noise over in Wisconsin. Leading the program in his 7th year up to that point was Brett Bielema. And I do this every video, but Wisconsin fans, let me know where you rank him all time on your coaching ladder. Moving over to the position that hands the ball off to the running back, Wisconsin had a 3-headed monster this year handing off balls, as they would start 3 QBs throughout this year. Starting with Danny O'Brien, then switching to Joel Stave, and finishing with Kurt Phillips. Normally I would include their stats, but all they did was hand the ball off, and they damn sure did an S-tier job at it. And I don't even mean that as an insult. When you go to Wisconsin, that's what you sign up for as a quarterback. Sliding to the running back room, the Badgers had an absolute monster in the backfield this year named Monte Ball, who'd rushed for 1,830 yards with 22 touchdowns. Name a better duo than running backs in Wisconsin, I'll wait. And finally, running out the offense at receiver, we got Jared Abbrederis. And his static shocked me. Dude would finish the season with 837 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. I know Monte Ball stats were insane, but having 837 receiving yards when you have 3 handoff merchants at QB is pretty impressive. The 12th ranked Wisconsin Badgers would begin the 2012 college football season with a nice little tune-up game against the Northern Iowa Panthers. Now, while the final score of this matchup was 26-21, the Badgers were in control of this game the entire way through, being up 13-0 going into halftime and 26-7 with 10 minutes left in the 4th quarter. Monte Ball was excellent from the backfield, rushing for 120 yards and a touchdown. But the man this game was Wisconsin's QB, Danny O'Brien. He'd go 19 of 23 for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. I might have to take back what I said earlier about the Badgers quarterbacks being handoff merchants. Well, before I make my final judgment, I'd have to see him play one more game, and luckily for me, their next game was a big step up in competition, as they would be traveling to the West Coast for a big-time non-conference game against the Oregon State Beavers.
Woods alongside. Surveys the field. Dumps it up. The ball's tipped incomplete. Empty backfield. Long snap count. Mannion. 2-step drop. Throws. Caught. Dropped. First down. 40 plus. As long as 46. Good foot. Looks long enough. Got it. For Oregon State. He wants some more. Flies it out to the flat. Breaks a tackle down the sideline and dances. Need 12 yards to move the chain. Sets his feet. Throws to the end zone. The pump, the throw, touchdown! And now Oregon State trying to protect the football. Remember, there are no timeouts remaining for Wisconsin. And Joel, this is such an interesting ball game. Very little offense, but then big plays and big decisions in the booth will impact the finish, and I'm sure it'll be talked about.
Wow, this game was boring. The offense was non-existent and both teams' defenses came to play. You would think this style of ball would favor the Wisconsin Badgers, but Oregon State matched their toughness, defeating the Badgers 10-7. It seemed like this entire game Wisconsin couldn't put anything together on the offensive side of the ball, as they would only total 207 yards, barely spending any time on the Beavers side of the field. While on the flip side, Oregon State was able to put together and sustain multiple drives, evident in them having the ball for over 11 more minutes. Before we move on, I want to say quarterback Danny O'Brien wasn't terrible this game, but he definitely didn't play his best ball, as there was a couple of times where his team needed him to make big throws and he just failed to do so. If you thought things couldn't get any worse for Danny, they would, as he would play his worst game of the season the following week against the Utah State Aggies, passing for only 67 yards. Thankfully, Monte Ball came to play, rushing for 139 yards and a touchdown, and his team would need every bit of those rushing yards, as Wisconsin would be down 14-3 going into halftime, barely scraping out the win against the Aggies 16-14. The start to the 2012 college football season had been an ugly one for Wisconsin. Things were not looking too good back in Madison, and the panic button had been hit, and changes were being made, more specifically at quarterback. As after the lackluster start to the season for Danny O'Brien, the coaching staff decided to make a change, going with Joel Stave in their next game at home against the UTEP Miners. And it seems like the switch-up at QB worked, as the Badgers would total 423 yards of offense, with Stave going 12 for 17 with 210 yards and a touchdown, and a 37-26 win. Wisconsin was now sitting with a record of 3-1, and while things were not going exactly how the Badgers had expected them to, they were still in the Big Ten race, as their loss came against a Pac-12 school, and there was still plenty of football left to be played on the season. Okay, so now that all the non-conference games were out of the way, it was time for the Badgers to begin Big Ten play, with their first game coming on the road versus 22nd ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers. Could the new guy under center Joel Stave be able to handle the pressure of playing in a sea of red, or would it be too much for him in Wisconsin?
Freshman, set to kick away. Both teams wearing the new unrivaled uniforms. The theme of this one is the quick and the red. We'll see who's quicker. We'll see who's stronger. Big Ten Open said it's bigger than that. Second down and 8. Fake the end around and load and fire. Stave going deep. Got a man out there. Another opening drive of the ballgame. Monte Ball behind. Is walking in for the touchdown. First one was a 3 and out. This time they work from the 17-yard line. Martinez gives off. Burkhead. Fumble. And Wisconsin. Wisconsin changes its mind, goes for the touchdown. The ball might be loose. Let's wait and see.
Look at the confusion.
Play action. Deep. Aberderis. 4 receivers for Martinez, who's going to run a quarterback draw. First down, a bunch more. Breaking away. Almost snapped it out of the... Play action. Burkhead rolls out there and catches it. Martinez lost the ball. It came off. I think he was in the throwing motion there. First and goal for the Badgers. Ball, touchdown with receiver spot. Martinez, quarterback draw. Found some room. Martinez on the run inside the 20 to the 5. Good drive. Martinez to the end zone. Touchdown. Tie the game. Kick on the way. And he's got it. Pressure. Throws too low. Incomplete. Now they'll bring out the field goal unit. They're trying to give the Cornhuskers the lead. Kick on the way. And it's good. O'Brien looks left. And back to his right. Fires. And it's complete. And moves. Everybody stacked up close for Nebraska. Ball hitting the backfield. The ball is out. Nebraska's got it, and they'll have the ball game.
Man, Wisconsin really let this game slip away, losing to the Nebraska Cornhuskers 30-27. The Badgers looked incredible for the first 2 quarters and part of the third, as they would hold a 27-10 lead. The offense was outstanding to begin the game. Joel Stave was letting that rock fly, and Monte Ball was reaching the end zone at will, rushing for 3 touchdowns early. All of this sounds like a recipe for success, and for a while it was, until Nebraska would turn things up in the third quarter, scoring 20 unanswered points. And on the flip side, for the rest of the game, after the Badgers had gotten off to that hot start, they would just blow a tire, not being able to put together any sustained drives. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they had like 3 or more drives that would end in 3 and outs during the second half, which is just never good. And because of their lack of success on the offensive side of the ball, in the second half, Wisconsin would lose to Nebraska 30-27, bringing their record on the season to 3-2. I know this loss must have hurt, because at the beginning of the season, this team was expected to possibly make a run at the Natty, and now they were just fighting to stay bowl eligible. Wisconsin was in urgent need of an easy win to help get their season back on track, and luckily for them, their next game would be against a 2-3 Illinois Fighting Illini squad. And if you want to know how bad this 2010 Illinois football team was, They finished the season 2-10, so that goes without saying the Badgers would handle business against them, winning 31-14. And I know it looks like they won the game pretty easily, but I have to mention Wisconsin was only leading 10-7 at the start of the fourth quarter. But a win's a win, right? And there were still some positives to take away from this game, such as Monte Ball looked good rushing for 116 yards and a pair of tuds, and quarterback Joel Stave would bounce back, playing much better this game, passing for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now sitting at 4-2, Wisconsin was about to embark on their most important stretch of the college football season. A 4-game stretch versus Purdue, Minnesota, Michigan State, and finally Indiana. You're probably wondering, what made this stretch of ball so important? Well, the Badgers' performance during this stretch would decide whether or not Wisconsin would be playing in the Big Ten title game or not. Because after this stretch, the only opponents left on their schedule were Penn State and Ohio State. And if you remember earlier into this video, I mentioned that both those schools were dealing with sanctions this year, so they were ineligible for the title game. Translation, if Wisconsin could survive this 4-game stretch, they'd be in the driver's seat to make the Big Ten title game and possibly finally win the Rose Bowl after losing it in back-to-back years.
Stave looking back the other way. Wide open is Pedersen. He'll walk in for 6. Toss play to Ball. Headed for pay dirt. And Ball is in for the touchdown. 5. Ball to carry again. Look at him slipping back and forth, and Monte Ball into the clear. Monte Ball is going to go all the way for the touchdown. At the very beginning of the season. James White now, Chris, 15 carries, 110 yards. Here's his 16th carry of the day. A lane, and White's going to walk in for the touchdown. White still in the backfield. He's going to take the direct snap this time and take off right inside the 5. Dances his way by a defender. Now back to the ground game once again, and James White has room to run. His second touchdown of the day. Ball straight ahead, and Monte Ball carries.
Play be that calm and throw like that. It's a perfect strike at 19-yard line. Its last 4 possessions. They're just not geared to do this. Maxwell wants a screen. That ball came out. Kyle French.
Yeah, personal foul is a 15-yarder. I think I may have taken the penalty.
Maxwell after the pump fake and the lined up right for Maxwell. Little shovel pass. Touchdown. 43-yard field goal try, hardly a gimme. So O'Brien wants to throw and pick up some of that yardage, maybe more to the sideline. And with these offensive and defensive matchups, the pressure is on the field goal kickers. And French comes through. Michigan State trying to keep this drive alive and not have to settle for a field goal try. Touchdown!
First and goal. Monte Ball to the outside, and Monte Ball, touchdown.
If I can make a stop on 3rd down.
Well, they can call it right here if they get the stop of James White, and he bursts up the middle, and James White has the first down and more. James White inside the 20, the 10, and the touch. Gordon, another big hole. Gordon inside the 10, the 5, and into the end zone. Touchdown Badgers from 17 yards out.
The Wisconsin Badgers would go 3-1 through this stretch of conference play, starting with back-to-back dominating performances versus Purdue and Minnesota. Starting with Purdue, the Badgers were on it from the start to the finish, totaling 645 yards of total offense, which had to have felt nice after how sluggish their offense had looked all season. Monte Ball was the man on a mission this game, rushing for a nasty 247 yards with 3 touchdowns, playing a huge role in the Badgers' 38-14 win against the Boilermakers. Versus the Golden Gophers, not much would change, as Wisconsin would win 38-13. This time, instead of Monte Ball dominating from the ground, it was the Badgers' other back, James White, who'd rush for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. The toughest game during this stretch had to easily be their game versus Michigan State. These teams were kind of exact copies of each other, solid defense with the focus on the rushing attack, which I guess is the reason neither team would be able to take control of this game for the first 4 quarters, as the score would be tied at 10 at the end of regulation. I do want to mention though that the Wisconsin starting quarterback would get injured right after the start of the 3rd quarter, so for the rest of the game the Badgers were relying on Daniel O'Brien, who was benched earlier this year if we remember. And as we all saw, that wouldn't work too well. Wisconsin would settle for a field goal in overtime while the Spartans would score a touchdown, winning the game 16-13. Definitely a tough loss, but the Badgers would bounce back in a big way during their final game of this stretch against the Indiana Hoosiers, winning 62-14. Wisconsin was now sitting with a record of 7-3 and a conference record of 4-2. At this point in the season, Wisconsin had already pretty much snatched up a spot in the Big Ten title game, as their next two matchups were versus Ohio State and Penn State, which they would lose both of those games in overtime. But like I already said, those two matchups didn't really matter that much, as the 7-5 Wisconsin Badgers were already locked into the Big Ten title game, where they'd be facing off against a familiar opponent, someone who broke their hearts earlier this year, the 12th ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers. Both teams had gone in opposite directions since their last meeting, but both of their paths eventually led to the same destination, the Big Ten title game, with the trip to the Rose Bowl on the line. Nebraska was coming in as the obvious favorites, but you know what they say, one of the hardest things to do in sports is beat the same team twice in the same season.
All right, Aaron, the atmosphere is electric here in Indianapolis, as tonight we will find out who will be crowned the 2012 Big Ten champion. Stakes much higher now. A Big Ten championship trophy on the line, and a trip to Pasadena and the Rose Bowl. And here's the handoff. Getting around the corner, he's got all sorts of running room. At the 40, still on his feet, breaks it back. How about this? On Wisconsin, touchdown on the 25, out of the gun. Martinez will throw on first down. Picked off the sideline. Touchdown, Badgers. Martinez in trouble, reverses, trying to break contain. Martinez up the sideline, still running. Look at it, Taylor Martinez. What a run! He's got a lane. Martinez, wow! Taylor Martinez, touchdown, Huskers! What an athlete! Orchestrated, straight ahead now, outside, touchdown! 58-yard line. Aberdelis wants to throw it, looks back, Phillips wide open, the quarterback. Hellcat, straight ahead, touchdown, back in front of him again. Here's the handoff, again, Gordon dives. Melvin Gordon with running room, Melvin Gordon down the sideline. Melvin Gordon still running. James White. He'll throw it. Touchdown. The yard line. Burkhead in motion. Martinez under pressure. He's got to get rid of it. Picked off. Down the sideline. Devitz. The deep man. There he is. Touchdown.
The weary eye now thinks these two teams are really going at each other hard.
Ball again, watch out. Monte Ball down the sideline.
Oh, what a stiff arm. Rugged. Touchdown.
57 yards.
And let their team execute was one of the better ones we've seen, I believe, this season. Just tremendous. A complete victory.
Third straight Rose Bowl appearance for Coach B.
Now, this is how the Wisconsin Badgers should have been playing ball all season. This game was dominated by Wisconsin from the start to the finish, as they would take down the 12th ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers 70-31, bringing home the Big Ten title for the second year in a row. The MVP of this game had to be Melvin Gordon. He'd rushed for 216 yards with a touchdown on 9 carries. Bro averaged like 24 yards per rush, which is just ludicrous. Wisconsin was now sitting with the record on the season at 8-5, and since they had captured the Big Ten title with that ugly record, they were now representing the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl, where they would be playing against the 6th-ranked Stanford Cardinal. While Stanford was in control of this game for a majority of it, the Badgers would only be down 3 until with about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter when Stanford would extend their lead to a touchdown. For some reason, Wisconsin would revert back to their regular season form, not being able to move the ball at all. But I do have to give credit to the Stanford defense, as they were pretty legit this year. All this goes without saying, Wisconsin would lose 20-14, making that the third time in a row the Badgers would lose in the Rose Bowl, putting their final record on the season at 8-6, and making them one of the weirdest conference champions I've ever seen. Alright, leaving Wisconsin, we head over to Corvallis for the next team up in this video, the 2000 Oregon State Beavers. When I tell you this team came out of nowhere to win a share of the Pac-10 title, I mean it. So where do we start with this team? Well, let's go back a couple of years and take a look at their last couple of seasons to paint a picture of how unexpected this historic season was for the Beavers. Going back 4 years, Oregon State hadn't had too much success in the college football world during that time, finishing with a 2-9 record and no bowl game in 1996, 3-8 with no bowl game in 1997, 5-6 missing a bowl game once again in 1998, and finally in 1999 they'd go 7-5 with the loss in the OHA Classic. I probably pronounced that wrong, I've never heard of that bowl game. Oregon State was making progress, slowly improving, but in 2000, when I tell you nobody expected them to have the season they had and compete for a Pac-10 title, I mean it. As going back in time and looking through some of the few Pac-10 preseason predictions I could find, the consensus, according to Stats.com, was that Oregon State would be a middle-of-the-road type of team in the Pac-10, finishing 5th behind teams such as Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington. So I'm just assuming this team was probably pinged for another 7-win season, and the best-case scenario for this squad being them making a better bowl game with a little more name-brand recognition. But that was just about it, right? Well, I wouldn't be covering them if that was the case. So now let's take a look at some of the dudes that helped put this 2000 Oregon State Beavers football team on the map. Leading the program in his second year up to that point at head coach, we got Dennis Erickson, and he had this defense playing on another level this season, as they would only allow 16.9 points per game, which was best for 10th in the nation. Skating over to the most important position in sports, quarterback, the man under center was Jonathan Smith. He'd passed for just shy of 2,500 yards with 17 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Heading over to the running back room, the man on this team was Ken Simulton. He'd have a monster year, rushing for 1,474 yards, which led the Pac-10, as well as punching it into the end zone 18 times, which would also lead the Pac-10. He also finished 9th in Heisman voting. Bro was on it this year, no cap. At the wide receiver position, I was immediately shocked to find out 2 pretty solid NFL receivers played for this squad, starting with TJ Houshmandzadeh, who'd catch 49 passes for 656 yards and 6 touchdowns. And get this, Chad Johnson, now known as Chad Ochocinco, was on this squad. He'd catch 33 passes for 716 yards with 6 touchdowns. Before I move on, I want to shout out the Beavers stud defensive back, Jake Kukas, who'd lead the Pac-10 in interceptions, picking off 5 passes this season. Oregon State would open up the 2000 college football season with a nice little tune-up game versus Eastern Washington. Well, it should have been a tune-up game, but in reality, this matchup was tight all the way through, with the Beavers only being up 14-12 with only a couple minutes left in the third quarter. I don't know what it was, but every time Oregon State would score a touchdown and try to put the game away, Eastern Washington would always respond, making this early season give me game a lot scarier than it really should have been. The Beavers would survive though, winning 21-19, in large part due to Ken Simulton rushing for 200 yards with 3 touchdowns. Ugly win, but hopefully it would be a wake-up call, because if they played like this, then they get eaten alive in the stacked Pac-10 this year. Man, the Beavers were playing with fire to start this season, as against the 0-2 New Mexico Lobos, things wouldn't get any smoother. The Lobos would be holding on to a 20-14 lead going into halftime, after they block a punt and return it into the end zone for 6. Oregon State needed to respond in a big way coming out of halftime, and their defense would, not allowing New Mexico to convert any first downs the entire game, and would keep them completely scoreless after halftime. It was just up to the Beavers' offense to make something happen, with the score still being locked at 20-14 at the end of the third quarter. Eventually, Oregon State would figure things out, though, in large part due to running back Ken Simulton, who'd account for 50 yards on the Beavers' 9-play, 65-yard drive that would end in a TJ Houshmandzadeh touchdown, giving them the 21-20 lead. The Beavers would hold on to the lead, leaning on their O-line to close the game out, winning 28-20. Now sitting at 2-0, Oregon State would finally have a dominant win on the season, taking down San Diego State 35-3. Ken Simulton would put together a decent performance, rushing for just shy of 100 yards with 2 touchdowns. Chad Johnson would even get in on the action, catching a touchdown in this big win against the Aztecs. Alright, so all of the non-conference easy games were out of the way. Well, they were supposed to be easy games, but whatever. The start to the season can always be tough sometimes. But now it was time for conference play, and the Beavers' first game up was against the conference juggernauts, the 8th-ranked USC Trojans. I really wish I could find these games' highlights, but when you go back so far, there's only so much you can do. Don't worry though, I managed to scrape together their other huge games, such as their matchups versus 13th-ranked Washington, 5th-ranked Oregon, and 10th-ranked Notre Dame. But we're not at those matchups just yet. So back to Oregon State versus USC. This game was huge, not just because USC was the boogeyman of the Pac-10, but the Beavers had lost 26 straight games to the Trojans. So there was a lot on the line, and the Beavers would need to bring their A game to stand a chance, and that's exactly what they would do. Especially running back Ken Simulton, as he played one of his best games of his entire career and one of the biggest, rushing for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns. While he dominated on the ground, his defense would put future Heisman winning quarterback Carson Palmer in a box, picking him off 3 times and forcing 4 turtle turnovers, in a historic 31-21 win for the Oregon State football program. This historic win would put the Beavers' record on the season at 4-0 and would move their rankings in the latest polls to the 23rd spot, which would be their first time cracking the top 25 since 1968 up to that point. Now ranked at the 23rd spot in the country, you'd think after pulling off one of the biggest wins in program history, this squad would get a little break before their next game. But college football waits for no one, and next up on the Beavers' schedule was a road game with the Pac-10 preseason conference favorites, the 13th-ranked Washington Huskies. I know I couldn't find the USC highlights. Well, I found Washington versus Oregon State.
Have the ability to go for 300. He did it last year for Rick Neuheisel, passing and rushing for 200. And Neuheisel said he wants his team to play less tense. He felt the players and coaches press at Oregon last week. At Oregon State, Dennis Erickson has had a storybook first 2 years in Corvallis. Took the Beavers to the first bowl game last year in 34 years. Last week, he knocked off USC, as we said, for the first time since 1967. Oregon State won the toss and deferred to the second half, so they are kicking off to Washington. And the Huskies are bringing it out from about 7 yards deep. And down, that's...
I'll tell you in a minute what the addition of Cazzetto has meant.
Smith looking deep, wide open. Robert Press mentioned, the true freshman Justin Robbins. Tuiasosopo with a shot to the end zone. Touchdown, Robbins!
Heat from Arizona State.
Now Smith will run. And it is Patrick McCall, and McCall is gone! Tuiasosopo downfield. There's Jeremy Stevens inside the 20. Stevens goes in motion. Alexis in for the touchdown. Arnold off to the left side. Tuiasosopo looking for him. Now must scramble. There goes Marcus. 3 yards out. It is on the way, and he knocks it through. The 42, they play action to McCall. Then they throw it to Prescott, and Prescott open. Akbar has to make a touchdown save. And goal from now the 11. Jonathan Smith looking, firing. Touchdown! Tuiasosopo leaning forward, and again they push him back.
And they did.
The tailback, Alexis, easily walks in. Huskies back in front. They rush from the right side. They give it to Arnold. Big hole right side. There goes Paul to the 30. Arnold to the 20 and out of bounds. First down. Tuiasosopo on the keeper. Dives for the touchdown. Blitz. Smith in trouble. Going deep. Look at this pass. Chad Johnson. Gone. Jonathan Smith slipping and sliding and still fires a strike. Blitz. Tuiasosopo picks it up. Now must scramble. Incomplete. TJ. Patrick. First down and more. 35 yards. On the way. No good.
Damn, I had no idea teams were scoring like this back in 2000. What a game. Sadly though, our boys over at Oregon State would lose in a thriller to the 13th ranked Washington Huskies 33-30. This game was back and forth the whole way through with both teams' offenses balling out. The Beavers would total 474 yards of total offense while the Huskies would total 504, with neither team turning the ball over. Fast forwarding to near the end of the third quarter, the Beavers would be down 20-14, but would retake the lead on an 11-yard touchdown pass from Jonathan Smith, giving them a 21-20 lead. Washington would respond, scoring back-to-back touchdowns, taking a 2-score lead. And just when the Beavers would need a huge play, Jonathan Smith would make one of the best passes I've ever seen, tossing a dart for 75-plus yards at Chad Johnson, cutting the Huskies' lead to a field goal. Oregon State's defense would make a big stop, giving the Beavers offense the ball back with less than 5 minutes left on the clock, where they would put together a decent drive getting into field goal range with a chance to tie the game and possibly send it to overtime. As we all saw though, the Oregon State kicker would miss nearly everything, putting the final score at Washington 33, Oregon State 30. Now, while this loss was tough, it wasn't the end of the world. Oregon State's record on the season would drop to 4-1, and their rankings in the polls wouldn't move much, actually wouldn't move at all, as they would stay ranked at the 23rd spot, which sounds about right, because can you really penalize the Beavers for losing on the road to the 13th ranked team in the country? Oregon State would bounce back after their loss to the Huskies, winning 4 games in a row, taking down Stanford 38-6, 23rd ranked UCLA 44-38, which in this game everyone on the offensive side of the ball was on one, as quarterback Jonathan Smith would play one of his best games of the season, passing for 351 yards with 4 touchdowns, and both of the Beaver running backs would total over 100 yards in this nice win over UCLA. The next 2 games up on Oregon State's schedule would be versus Washington State, which would end 38-9, and finally a 38-32 win against the California Golden Bears. That was anything but easy, as the Bears would fight the entire night trying to upset the Beavers. This game started off all Oregon State, with the score being 31-12 with less than 2 minutes in the first half. With their backs on the wall, Cal would do something I think took the Beavers by surprise. They start to claw back, scoring twice to cut the lead to 9. And before you know it, the Golden Bears were within 2 after an 81-yard touchdown pass around the 9-minute mark of the fourth. Oregon State would respond back though with an 8-play, 84-yard drive that would end in a touchdown, icing the game. Oregon State was now sitting with an impressive record of 8-1, and their ranking in the polls would catapult all the way up to the 10th spot in the country. For all intents and purposes, I should be skipping their next game versus Arizona to get to the biggest match of the season against the 5th-ranked Oregon Ducks. But Oregon State versus Arizona is one of the few highlights I could find, so I figured why not show them dominating the Wildcats before we move on to rivalry week.
Can they do it 2 times in a row? McCall in for the touchdown. Touchdown in their victory over Utah. 3rd and 8. Smith bobbles. Blitz on. Jonathan throws. Touchdown! Simonton. There's the home run threat, and he is gone.
Northwest, Oregon State 9-1, the Oregon Ducks 9-1, Washington 9-1. Something's gonna give next weekend.
The Beavers would take down the Wildcats 38-9, extending their winning streak to 5 headed into rivalry week, where Oregon State would arguably be playing in their biggest game in program history, a home game versus the 5th-ranked Oregon Ducks. What was on the line during this matchup? Well, a conference title and a BCS bowl game bid. Some of you might be wondering, were the Beavers possible natty contenders? And to answer that, no, not really. Only because there were a couple of heavy hitters ranked ahead of them, such as Oklahoma, Florida State, and Miami, as well as Washington being ranked ahead of them with a head-to-head win. Regardless, this game versus the Ducks was huge. Could the Oregon State Beavers cap off this incredible regular season with the win in the Civil War? 8th-ranked Oregon State versus the 5th-ranked Oregon Ducks. Who'd win?
It's been a long time since they've had this kind of feeling around this part of the country where they've had this much at stake on a game that is called here the Civil War. And that is, it really doesn't fit the description of the real thing as we know it in American history, but it's a pretty good-sized fistfight anyway.
You know, Oregon State comes out, they'll be on defense first. Here we are in a game called the Civil War, and they've got defensive ends named Grant and Jackson. You've got to love that.
The field is new, and it is fast. And both these teams are loaded with speed, offensively and defensively. The kick is a good one, carrying down to the 3-yard line, where it is taken by Henspard, and he's sure taken. So 3rd down and 32, Harrington under siege. Ball intercepted on the ricochet by Jake Tuckus. And Oregon State's first possession is going to be deep. Game is finally over. Long time to settle that one. It's a blue dart. Touchdown. Oregon's down for the Beavers. Right now, the Beavers have control of the game as Jonathan Smith puts air under it downfield. Pass is caught by Prescott again. Into the end zone he goes. Pretty healthy for the 4th quarter, I'm sure. Here's the ball thrown out to Amundsen. Amundsen for 44-yard try with Harrington doing the holding. It's not good. On the campus of Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. This one, and Jonathan Smith going deep down the middle. Caught by Chad. Verdict, the holder was Mike Custer, the punter. The kick is away. It's good. Harrington goes deep with it for Tucker. A good picture. Wide out. And Harrington, quarterback draw. Touchdown. Scott catching his 5th ball there for 95 yards. He has 2 touchdowns. Simon outside. He scores. Intercepted. Picked off. Harrington's pass is away. Caught. LaCorey Collins. He's got it. It's touchdown. 41-yard line. Passes away down the middle of the field to Tucker. Tucker's got a big play at the 31. Harrington hit from behind, fumbles the football. Beavers pick it up. Sefa O'Reilly hit him in the back, knocked the ball out. And Delawrence Grant almost got away with it and went the other way. So it's the Oregon State defense that just refuses to yield.
Oregon State would take down their in-state rivals 23-13, earning them a share of the Pac-10 title as well as putting their rankings in the final regular season polls at the 5th spot in the country. Like I said earlier, any other season this Beaver squad could have been possibly competing for a BCS Natty bid. But with how stacked this year's field was, they never really had a shot. However, I'm more than sure the loyal fans of Oregon State were more than happy with the Beavers getting an invite to a BCS bowl game, more specifically a date with 10th-ranked Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl. This season was historical for the Beavers, winning 10 games, earning a share of the conference title as well as having one of their highest rankings in program history. All this is amazing, but Oregon State had to finish off the successful season with the BCS bowl game win. It would be the cherry on top of this excellent season. And against the Fighting Irish, that's exactly what they would do, in dominant fashion.
ABC Sports proudly presents Game 2 in our exclusive coverage of the Bowl Championship Series.
Timeout. And Simonton the lone back on 2nd down and 8. Smith throws. Hushmanzada might be off to the races. Check that. It's Chad Johnson off to the races for a touchdown.
4 up here.
This has to be quick. Lavecchio zips it into traffic and incomplete with 2 seconds left inside 30 yards. And with a lot of help from Pitt. 2nd and 7. Smith with a lot of time. Going toward the end zone. Caught. Touchdown. So he'll hold back the punt.
Come on, 17.
Hushmanzada from the 28. Straight ahead. Bounced off one of his teammates. And the ball came out. They're not blowing the play dead yet. If it stands, it's a touchdown for Terrell Roberts.
So when he got the job, went with him to Oregon State. He said he would have followed him to
Simonton bulldozing his way into the end. And Oregon State proved tonight that it intends to stick around at the top of the college football landscape for a while. It's a perch to which they are unaccustomed. But they're starting to dig their heels in a little bit at the top of the college football landscape.
And if this was your first chance to get to see Oregon State, because they didn't play a lot of nationally televised games, get used to this scene with Dennis Erickson and the recruiter that he is. This program will be on top for a while.
And he's with Leslie Goodell.
Well, Coach, you had quite a drive